Love solo travel, hate it, or are you indifferent? Nausheen Farishta learned to love solo travel in her 30s. She's taken solo trips to Costa Rica, Mexico, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Japan, and many more. Her list is ever growing. On her travel blog, globe-gazers.com, she shares that solo travel for women is not as scary or far-fetched as some may think. Solo travel offers many incredible benefits. Enjoy your own company, build that untouchable self-confidence, navigate independently, and become a better communicator as you'll meet so many new people with diverse viewpoints on the road. In this episode, we're breaking down how solo travel can be, 1, transformative, and also a hot take, how it's more affordable than traveling with friends and family. One of the big aha moments for me in this episode is how traveling with others can often influence our spending decisions. It's actually so easy to get caught up in the moment, compromise, and end up unintentionally going over budget. I know I've been there many times, and sometimes I'm even the one influencing others to spend more. If you're not already following the podcast, I encourage you to do so right now. It's a free way to support my work. Hi, I'm Danielle, Financially Savvy Traveler here. Plus, you'll get notifications when new episodes drop on Thursdays. If you enjoy this episode, which I know you will, and want more solo travel content, check out episode 90 next for how to plan your first solo backpacking trip. Links will be in the episode description. By the way, our resource for this week is Nausheen's ebook, From Doubtful to Darling, a beginner's planning guide to confident solo travel. You can get 15% off with the promo code GLOBE15. Again, that's 15% off with the promo code GLOBE15. All the links mentioned in the episode will be in the episode description. Welcome to The Thought Card, a podcast about travel and money, where planning, saving, and creativity leads to affording travel, building wealth, and paying off debt. We are the Financially Savvy Travelers.
So when you're traveling alone, it's a little bit easier to find that sort of shared accommodation. It's a step above a hostel, but you still have the opportunity to meet other people, and more often than not, meet a local and get that additional perspective. So that's something that I recommend. Hostels are also great. Slow travel, if you can, longer term stays are also great. Public transportation. And some of these are not exclusive to solo travel, but they also apply to solo travel. So these are some of the things that I've done. The other piece is that when you're traveling solo and you are eating out, chances are you're getting more food than you can finish in one sitting. And so if you're comfortable and you want to take leftovers, you can get 2 meals out of one, if that's something, that applies. But on the flip side, I have had places like I've gone out to a pretty nice restaurant in Rome alone for lunch, and they offered me half portions. So you can also get half portions and save that way. And then, of course, grocery stores. And then, of course, the tried and true, where you go. You have complete ownership when you're traveling alone of where in the world you go. So you get to choose the destination that aligns with your budget, and you get to choose when to go. So it might be easier for you to go during shoulder season instead of having to rely on someone else's vacation time.
So you learned to love solo travel in your 30s. What prompted you to change your perspective from hating it to loving it?
Actually, taking a solo trip in my 30s is how I realized, I actually like it this time around. So initially, when I had first taken my solo trip, I was a different person. It was about 5 to 10 years prior to this second foray out in my 30s. And when I took this additional trip, it was in my 30s. The reason I even took this solo trip was because I realized that I had this desire to travel, and that a lot of people said they had a desire to travel and, would get me all excited about taking a trip together. But I learned that they weren't able to or willing to prioritize travel the same way that I was able and willing to prioritize it. So it wasn't like I decided, oh, I'm going to love solo travel from now on and let me just go and do this. No, it really wasn't even my first choice. But upon taking that solo trip in my 30s, I realized, okay, I actually really enjoy it this time. And then I was able to reflect and figure out why that is. Why is this so different? And there are a few things that had happened in my life that had led to such a different experience. One is that I came face to face with the realization that I had had really, really low self worth for most of my life. And one of the ways that I was able to confront that, or what I was able to do with the realization, was to leave a really unhealthy marriage and get divorced. And that, in and of itself, was empowering and a step toward improving my relationship with myself. And then the world went into lockdown immediately after. And so here I was, not only divorced and with this realization of low self worth, but also a year in isolation. And I was able to work on my relationship with myself even further. So the short answer to your question is the big differentiator was that my relationship with myself was completely transformed, and I learned how to enjoy my own company. And that made solo travel a lot more fun.
I absolutely love that. And I think a lot of people are waking up to the realization of how transformative solo travel or just travel can be. So your story is a testament of that. I also know that a lot of people will say, and myself included, that go on a trip with your friends, go on a trip with your family, because that's an easy way to save and share cost. But I love your perspective that solo travel can be an affordable way to see the world. So, how does that actually work?
The way that it works is that you don't necessarily realize, you might not realize this because I didn't, but when you're traveling with your friends, your own budget sort of has to compete with your friend, your family's budget, right? And there's no guarantee that you're going to come out on top. In fact, it becomes really, really difficult to manage if you have differing budgets. And even if your budgets are similar, it's very easy to get caught up in the moment and get caught up in the vacation, lifestyle when you're traveling with other people because you just want to have fun, you want to do the things. Also, when you're traveling with other people who might have different preferences, you end up doing everything that they want to do and everything that you want to do. And so your itinerary has sort of additional costs built in. Whereas if you were traveling by yourself, only doing the things you really cared about, you probably wouldn't be spending as much to do things that aren't as fun for you on your own. And then food is a big thing, right? Food, dining out is such a social thing. How do you connect and catch up with your friends when you're at home? You meet up for dinner, you meet up for brunch. And when you travel with friends, or what I found for me, is we bring that with us. And so we end up having 3 meals a day out, and we're sitting at restaurants and we're ordering a bunch of food and drink and talking and catching up and enjoying each other's company and racking up that bill at the same time. So those are some of the pieces. And then it trickles in all these seemingly minor ways where maybe your friend isn't comfortable on public transportation. So you end up taking taxis and Ubers around with them. Maybe they're used to staying in a particular kind of accommodation that falls outside of your budget. And you don't necessarily want to stay across town from the person you're traveling with. So it's just easier to either try to compromise. You still might spend more than you had originally planned, or, completely compromise. So there's a lot of ways that it adds up.
And it definitely sneaks up on you. Like, I am planning a Disney trip with my family, and they actually wanted to do a Disney resort that is on the lower tier. So I'm the one that was advocating for, no, we need the higher tier Disney accommodation. So it could work vice versa, where you're influencing others or others are influencing you as well. So these are just powerful, powerful thoughts. I'd love to circle back to chat about when you are now not in a solo setting, you're traveling with others. How do you keep your values of, especially your budget? How do you stay in line and not compromise as much than when you before. Because I feel like the big realization for me, like when we're talking about, is that influence that traveling with others has on your budget. So, how do you keep those boundaries and lines intact?
It is really tough. It's tough because, especially as someone who usually solo travels, as much as I love it, it's also really special to be able to travel with your loved ones and friends, and you really want to make the most of it. What I have done is that doesn't become the exclusivity of my trip. So there will be at least a piece of it that's solo that I'm still doing for myself. And that's partly, budget can play into that, but also because it's how I like to experience a place. I like to have my own perspective on it, walk through it on my own. There have been friends who I've had conversations with where we've kind of collectively realized, both from a budget, but also from a health standpoint of, hey, we really tend to eat and drink a lot differently around each other when we're having fun. And so if you have friends where you can have that open conversation with, once you're aware, like you said, once you become aware of this dynamic going on, then you can have a chance to address it.
Let's talk about self discovery again, because I feel like you know yourself very well, Nasheen, that you can identify these kind of like hard to pinpoint things, like how your money's being affected when you travel solo versus with others, and also your habits. So, talk to us about this self discovery and also how that plays in the fabric of who you are as a traveler. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's such a good question. And it's interesting because it's one of those things that's sort of like what came first. So I wrote an ebook recently about a beginner's guide to planning confident solo travel, and it's called From Doubtful to Daring. And I go into it a little bit there because we talk about there is a solo travel readiness self assessment in there to help you see where you're at and start building that initial level of awareness. But one of the things that I make note of there is, regardless of your results, some of these benefits and the self discovery we talked about can be there before. And a lot of it can come from the experience of solo traveling and spending that time with yourself. So it's a little bit of the chicken or the egg of which came first, the being in touch with yourself and the self discovery, or the traveling and getting to that point. And I think it's important to have grace for ourselves that we're all on that path and always, learning more and more. In terms of how it shows up, though, once you start solo traveling and getting in touch with yourself, that awareness just kind of sneaks up on you. It becomes a way of you to talk with yourself and your inner dialogue and connecting with yourself. And so it becomes more and more seamless. And then the other thing I will say for, more of the tactical intentional piece is journaling. So when you're traveling alone too, I think sometimes people think, okay, I'm going to come back and transform and be this whole other person. And some of that is gradual. And if there's something that you're seeking to improve upon, or some way that you want to shift, being intentional and reflective about it is really, really key too.
I know when I'm solo traveling, sometimes there's this like push to fill my itinerary to the brim because I don't want to necessarily like be alone with my thoughts sometimes. Or especially as a mom, it's like I actually don't do anything because I'm so exhausted. So it's either one extreme, either I'm overdoing it or I'm doing nothing, which is fine too. But have you noticed any of like trying to compensate as a solo traveler because you're trying to not feel so lonely? Any thoughts on that?
Not since that first trip that I took, where I came back and I thought, that's a trip where I felt like I really latched on to people around me because I was like, save me from myself being alone. Have I had moments of loneliness and boredom in my solo travels since? Absolutely, yes. But I think that is part of it where I have to even tell myself, okay, then be bored. Then be bored for a little bit. This is a perfect opportunity to check in and see, okay, if I could wave a magic wand right now and be doing anything, what would that be? That's a great question for getting to know yourself and see. And maybe the answer is I would sit here and rest and I would look out at a pretty view and that would be enough. Or maybe it's I really want to be around people. Let me open up my Viator app or, one of my travel experience apps and book a group class with someone or an outing or a day tour. So there are so many ways, both free where you can run into people or paid where you're, joining a group tour where if you are worried that you're going to have too much time to yourself, you can do something about that. But I also would encourage people to lean into that discomfort. That is part of the growth, right? I think a lot of times we want the growth out of experiences without the discomfort, and it just doesn't really go that way. So push yourself. That's a good opportunity to push.
I love your perspective. I absolutely love it. I'd love to switch gears a bit and talk more about the logistical piece. So, as a solo traveler, what are some of your favorite things to do, like your activities that you enjoy while traveling?
My personal favorites are I love doing cooking classes especially when I'm traveling internationally in new countries and food tours. I'm a big foodie, so I love that perspective on it. I also think like I took a solo trip about a year ago to Oaxaca City, and there are certain places where, I'm more or less comfortable being out alone after dark. And so for that one, I was a little less comfortable with it. So I joined a group taco tour, around the city. And that was a fun way for me to meet other people, but also to get to try the food and get a local's perspective on it. So those are my favorites. And then from time to time, I'll book a day tour if there are must see sites. But I also love just getting lost in places. I love just walking aimlessly without an agenda, without an itinerary, or I have to be here at this time on this day, and just take in the sights and the sounds. And I think that's the piece that when I was fast traveling in my 20s got overlooked a lot because it was like, we got to cram in all of these attractions. We've got to do all these things. And when you're traveling with other people, we have to do everything I want to do and everything you want to do. And when you're alone, you can just wander and you can go sit in front of the Trevi Fountain for 3 hours if you want to in the morning with a cappuccino. So,
One of the things that I've really been appreciating is spas right now as I'm older, like my 30s compared to my 20s. I definitely enjoy a spa treatment when I'm solo. I also love walking tours, food tours, bike tours. I just love being able to see the city from a more like expert perspective or have like a large overview. I just love that as well. And then I'm one of those people that I love craft beer. So you'll see me at a brewery or at a bar. I'll just like sit at a bar, even at restaurants, instead of sitting at a booth or, depending on the layout of the restaurant, like I will sit at the bar. Everyone's kind of heads down and everyone's doing their thing. So I could just kind of be in my own little world. So again, it makes it so much easier. I remember when I was younger, I would think that like when I walk into some place, everyone's looking at me. So then it's like, no one is looking at you. No one. You just like go
so
about your
true.
day.
No one is looking. And if you need to, imagine that if people are looking, you are a stranger. You're an actress. You can be whoever you want. You're that confident, mysterious solo traveler, but truly no one's looking.
Absolutely. What has been some of your favorite places to solo travel in the US, Europe, or just worldwide?
Yeah. So I really loved Costa Rica. So that is where, when I took that initial solo trip in my 30s, I went straight to Costa Rica. Had never been there before in my life and just decided that's where I was going to go. I also really enjoy Mexico, and that trip to Oaxaca City was really, really wonderful. And I met a lot of people just randomly and on tours, but just outside of a food truck. So that was pretty fun. And I have just a love affair with Italy. Like, that is where I want to move to. I want to move to Rome, which everyone is like, oh, that's like the dirtiest, loudest part of Italy. Why? But I don't know why. It's just holds an allure for me. And I spent about a year living in Madrid ages ago, and I really like Spain. It's nice to be somewhere where I can speak the language, and I speak Spanish decently okay. So that helps. I almost would say Japan, except the language barrier was so tough that it just added to the exhaustion. It's a great destination for solo travel in general, but I went for a month, which was a lot. So yeah.
When you look at your favorites, like your top 5 favorites, what do they have in common? And how does that play for the solo traveler? Would love to hear, like, is it they all have the same aesthetic or things to do? How would you describe them?
That's a really good question. I really like that. I think it is. It's a vibe. It's the feeling of it because I know that I am not a museum person and I am not a super history buff. I like walking around Rome and being hit with ruins in my face and thinking about, wow, who walked here? But it's that. It's more like, where do I feel like I can just feel the pulse of the city all around me without having to actively seek out a museum to understand the culture? Where are there cafes where I can sit and people watch, or, outdoor areas where people are out at all hours and there's this liveliness, but also there are quiet spaces where I can go away and soothe myself in parks? Mexico City is so chaotic on the one hand, but then has this beautiful, gorgeous park. And you go inside, you're transported somewhere totally different. And of course, food. Like, the entire reason I even chose Oaxaca City was because it's known as like the kitchen of Mexico or something, and it's the big foodie place. So I'm really, really guided by that. That's interesting. Do you have that for yourself? Do you notice where it is that you really like to go?
I definitely have contrast because my top destinations are like Iceland and Bermuda and China. And what they have in common is breathtaking viewpoints from the pink sand beaches in Bermuda, Iceland volcanoes, and just valleys. It's so beautiful. I also love what you mentioned about quiet spaces because I do like to be in the center of an action, but I also like to kind of sit down and be reserved and just kind of observe. So it's interesting because knowing your travel interest and what you enjoy definitely helps you pick destinations that fit,
Yeah.
especially in solo travel. I feel like sometimes picking not the best destination could definitely tamper your like
Yes.
expectations and you come back. Have you had any situations like that where you're like, this is not what I expected, and maybe this could have not been the best solo travel destination?
Yes. Well, one thing that just brought up for me is that the other thing in common between the destinations, and this is related, that I just mentioned, is the warmth of the people. And what is the culture like in terms of how you interact with other people and how willing they are to, bring you in and be warm and friendly and say hello as you pass them on the street or not. I very recently was in France, and I think France, it's a great solo travel destination. I've done it several times. I love being in Paris alone. I think there were a lot of things that went into this though. And so this is like beyond the location, which matters. It's also the time of year that you're going. So I went in February, and I don't know why I did that to myself. Like, I should have been in Portugal or in Spain where there would be warmer climates and warmer people. And not that I ran into any rude people. It just, maybe I was not my best self because it was rainy and cold and I was in France for 3 weeks. And so I think being in touch with yourself for that, but also it's okay to, mess up a little bit. And like, now I learned, even though I've taken so many solo trips, and maybe I should have, maybe part of me knew that I shouldn't be traipsing off to France in February. Now I know. And the reason that I did that was also because I have learned that beyond being a beach person or a mountain person, that's like the common thing they ask you, right? I'm more of a city person. And so I like being in cities. And so I was considering like Canary Islands. And I was like, what am I going to get so bored over there? And then that's all I wanted to do was be there. So you live and learn.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always say that, sometimes a trip, because we mentioned like fast travel and slow travel, like sometimes fast travel helps you decide if you want to go back to a city. So I do like the aspect of like having a shorter trip to get a lay of the land and be like, I definitely want to come back. I definitely want to spend a lot more time here. So I feel like I know the answer to this question, but if someone is thinking about solo travel, would you say that solo travel is worth it or not?
As someone who has gone through the fear and dealing with not only my own worries, but the pressure and worries of everyone around me, yes, it's still worth it. It's still worth it to push past any of the doubts, any of the fears, to go and travel and see the world without waiting on anybody else. That is, invaluable because the time is passing either way. If you want to go, it's better to go alone than to not go at all. And there's a lot of power in being able to go alone. And if you need a place to get started, I do have solo travel itineraries on my blog from trips that I've taken. I've gone solo, so you can use that as inspiration on globe-gazers.com.